Hello, global gardeners. It's great to be back. I missed you all last week when I was traveling. So I thought we'd have a good show today to welcome myself back and to see all of you again. Want to give a shout out to Chris Lilly from Calgary, Canada, and of course our friend Rick Thillian from Sydney, Australia, who is up way too late, but we do appreciate your time, Rick. And I also want to give a shout out to Tara DeRuin, a new member of the Gardner Scott community. So, welcome, Tara. And real quick question to start the day. Debsy says, I have a second year onion plant whose purpose is to repel deer last year. They're starting to flower. Will the flowers be good for beneficial insects? And the answer is, of course. Flowers in the garden are great, but particularly those big flowers, the umbel flowers like you might see on a dill or a carrot, or those globe flowers that you'll see on an onion. Those are wonderful flowers, especially early in the season for the insects that are coming to the garden. And so keep those flowers and consider saving the seeds. I've got a video on saving onion seeds that might be helpful if you want to know how to do that. And so, as we proceed today, I want to get beyond just me answering your questions. I want to focus on the opportunities that we all have to learn from all the other gardeners around us. Now, of course, I'm talking on YouTube and I'm making YouTube videos. There are many other gardeners that we can learn from on YouTube. And I think one of the best gardeners these days that is helping to push the information out to all of us is Enoch Graham from the Urban Gardener. Good morning, Enoch.
Good morning, Scott. Great to be here with you. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. And the reason that I say that I think Enoch is doing such a great job is because on the Urban Gardener channel, you've had videos for a number of years now, but you're moving in a new direction, almost exclusively to the live cast or the live streams. And you're
Yeah,
doing twice a week, Saturday and Sunday. And what
yeah,
makes you, I think, stand out is you are inviting some of the biggest YouTube names, some of the most popular YouTube gardeners, and you're sharing your time with them for the rest of us. So tell us a little bit about the shows you do on Saturday and Sunday.
yeah. Well, you've been a great guest and a great person to be on our show over the last couple of years. It was, again, like you said, kind of a move in a different direction for me. From more of the videos that I've done, the Let's Get Growing show was just kind of an idea that kind of came out of COVID and all of the, Zoom meetings and and all of us getting together and having these interactions. And one of the things that I found that was really fun about the video side of what I was doing was when I got to travel and go and visit people and go and meet other gardeners and go, get into their garden spaces and be able to interview and talk to them and share that kind of passion for growing and gardening with other people. So when I saw this new kind of format for us, being able to connect with each other, that just really kind of expanded that part of what I was doing with the channel that I had. And again, too, like you said, I've been really lucky and just putting the work in to really try to make sure that we've got some really great guests, people who you can really gain a lot of great information, learn about gardening stories from other gardeners and all of that too, and basically just kind of share my space as kind of a community space for the
Yeah.
whole gardening community as a whole, and to be able to have some of these really great guests like we have to be able to share their garden stories, their garden experiences, and those sort of things, I think is kind of inspiring, not just to me getting to do the interviews and have these discussions and everything, but for everyone else out there who gets a chance and opportunity to be able to hear kind of just a little bit of a different side of some of these gardeners. I mean, again, like I said, there's some
Yeah.
popular people who do some really great stuff on their own channels, lots of great information that they have, and going and checking out their channels and learning from them is a great thing. But to come onto our shows or it's like what you do here today as well, is just that extra experience that we get, for those of us who follow along the gardening community, to learn just a little bit more about who we are and what drives us to grow.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel, and I've said this many times before, that I continue to learn from every gardener I meet. We all have information to share. We all have something that we can teach, even more when we're not really aware of it. By seeing how someone else does it and by touring
Hmm.
another garden, we internally often gain something that we don't even share with the gardener at the garden that we're visiting. And so as you're
Yeah.
talking to all of these guests that you've had, are there any moments, any particular guests, any tips that they've shared with you on the show that really stand out, that you think are great lessons to to share with all the rest of us?
Yeah, I think, well, really ultimately is finding those similarities. I think that all of us find in our gardening experiences, that I find when I'm talking to other people. We all have kind of a different garden story, a different reason for how we got into what, I guess, I say, that starts out as a hobby and then becomes a passion.
Mhm.
And that's the one thing I think I find the most fascinating, and what I get the most out of in any all of the interviews that I do, is getting that even further connection with other people with different backgrounds, coming from different parts of the world, even, and being able to share that passion for growing, that passion for gardening, and to be able to hear how they came to it all, and how those sort of things affect what they do in the garden. And I think one of the biggest things really is to find out from people how much the garden connection is to them personally, more so than just, we're all out growing food, we're all out, and enjoying our times outdoors and nature and all that sort of stuff. But when you find and listen to a lot of the stories you hear from people about how they connected with their gardens on a emotional level, but a
Sure.
psychological level, just a way to kind of really kind of get away from the world in a way, and all the craziness that's going on around us, whether it is in the world or, it's just simply at home, family issues, work issues, those sort of things, and how people find, that their garden helps relieve them of that stuff.
Absolutely. The weather, and you and I were talking a little bit about this before the show. Weather for most of us is beginning to warm. We're getting out in the garden. And this week, every day, of course, I was in the garden multiple times a day. But it's those little things, I think, that really bring that down to earth, so to speak.
Hmm.
And in my greenhouse, that's the only place I have plants that are actively growing right now. The others are starting to bud, and I'm getting some blossoms on my fruit trees. But in my garden, I have some lettuce, and as is typical for this time of year, aphids show up. And so
Hmm.
I had aphids on my lettuce, and magically, almost overnight, I had ladybug larvae on the
Oh,
lettuce that was
yes.
eating all of those aphids. And it's one of those magical moments of nature. And as a gardener, most of us would see that, and I was enthralled. I took photos, I took
Hmm.
video, I just stared at these little ladybug nymphs that were eating all of the aphids and leaving behind all their little white desiccated bodies. And
Yes.
it was just so amazing to
Yeah.
me, and it made my whole week. So you're exactly right. The world is left behind when we can get in the garden and focus on
Yeah.
some of those things.
Yeah, and it's in those little moments like that that's where we find that sort of sense of connection, to that further connection that we have to our gardens and ourselves.
Absolutely. And so why don't you
Mhm.
share with everybody where you're at and actually what's happening in your garden right now?
Yeah, I live in Southern Oregon, and It's we're right now in the garden. We're in that transition period right now. I've got some cool weather stuff growing in there that's still kind of going, and I'm harvesting from, like you mentioned, lettuce. I got, bunches of different types of lettuce out in my elevated raised beds that I have out in my back patio. Spinach, still pulling some spinach right now, which is great. I'm expecting, though, because of the weather, we had some warm days this last week. So, spinach, is one of those first things that's going to start to bolt on me. So
Yeah.
I'm trying to get as much of it as I can right now, and as I'm sure it's going to be done. And then again, to peas, we got peas out there that are just growing up some trellises and doing really
Nice.
great right now. So we got a lot of that stuff going, but we're also, again, like I said, in that transition period. So I've got a bunch of stuff that's actually indoors right now: tomatoes, peppers. We got some eggplants and different things like that that are going to be hardened off this week, because I'm going to get them out in the garden this next week. Hopefully everything's all straight for me as far as the weather is
Good.
concerned. And although we are still a few weeks from our last frost date, the 10-day forecast is looking great. So I figure in about a week I'll know well enough ahead of time that if everything's a go for us. So I'm it's that point where it's like, do I do it now, or do I wait another day or two? Do I do it now, or so
Yeah.
another another fun part of gardening is making sure that we get our timing right.
And so, yeah, I'm familiar with the Southern Oregon weather, and like you, I'm a couple weeks away from the last frost date, and I have noticed, of course, many of us have warming trends in recent years, but I always
Mhm.
give myself at least a week and sometimes 2 weeks of a buffer, because the average last frost date is an average. Half the time
Mhm.
we have our last frost before that, half the time we have our average last frost after that. And so, like you, I look at the forecast and I'm looking at the 10 day. But do
Yeah.
you have a buffer like that built in, where you have your last frost date, but you're really planning to start a week or two later, and
Mhm.
then you look at the forecast and make your determination that way? How exactly do you do it?
Yeah, exactly. That's in, like I'm saying, is I'm looking at, 10 days, and I'm looking at that trend. Is it going up, or is it looking like it's dipping a little bit? And if I see any dips, especially at this point in time, my last frost date's gonna be mid-May. So, we're looking at 2 weeks. And so if I see, 2 weeks is still 14 days from now. And like you said, there's still another few days we've got to think about after that as well.
Mhm.
So I'm figuring, if I go another 5, 6 days and it still see that trend going up, then I see that as I'm ready to go. I'm going to go ahead and go for it, because the trend is warming up versus any sort of possible. And then again, too, looking even at even of the longer forecasts too that you can check out as well, just to
Mhm.
kind of get a little bit of a better idea. But yeah, that's basically what I'm looking for. When it comes to the ones that I am going to be hardening off and transplanting from my indoor plants. Now, if I'm going to be direct seeding anything like that, like the cucumbers and like curcubits and things like that, I'm going to wait still. I'm still going to
Good.
wait. I'm not gonna try to test it or play around with it or anything. I mean, what I'm doing when I'm maybe playing those few days or something is I've got already established plants. I've got plants that are working and growing through the changing and transition. But starting a plant, I want to definitely make sure that my soil temperature is good and all of that goes as far as those go too. So I'll wait possibly another week or so, maybe even closer to June, before I'll even start direct sowing those sort of things.
That's a good idea. I love
Yeah.
that thought, and that's exactly what I do. I'll use the average last frost date as a guideline for hardening off,
Hmm.
because I give myself that extra week, and that's the time to harden off, and then I'll get those indoor plants out in the garden. But I completely agree with you. The
Yeah.
direct sow seeds that need warmer temperatures and can't handle
Hmm.
the frost at all,
Yeah.
yeah, I'm okay waiting, having patience, and getting them
Hmm.
in the ground in June after the temperatures are warm up.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
and this is something I've you know, I'm gonna tell you, I learned from you, you know, over a couple of years back, and that's just the understanding and really making sure that we're, you know, got the right soil temperature. Soil temperature
Mhm.
is huge. Now, if I go and I put those seeds out a little bit early and some cool weather does come, and I've got these young little seedlings that have just now been affected by this frost that doesn't work well for them, that's going to set back those plants. So in the long
Absolutely.
run, if I'm waiting that little extra time, I'm actually giving my plants a head start, if you would, in a sense, that they're gonna do better, they're gonna grow better, and they're not gonna be affected by any sort of stunting or anything by any weather issues. So they're just gonna go
Absolutely.
at it. If I wait for it, they're just gonna go at it. They're just gonna grow.
Yeah, and especially for those of us that have been gardening for a while, you can see the difference. I mean,
Hmm.
it takes a while. We really do have to focus on what our plants are doing, but they do take off when the soil temperature is right, the daytime temperature, the nighttime temperature. When all that is right, they really do take off. And you were mentioning looking at the nighttime temperature before we came on the show. I think
Yeah.
that is also really important. The
Hmm.
50 degrees Fahrenheit, 10 degrees Celsius for me is a magic threshold. When the
Yeah.
nighttime temperatures are above that, the plants grow so quickly
Hmm.
that it's worth waiting just a couple days to get that growth.
Yep. Yeah, exactly. And like I said, it's about making sure that I'm not doing anything to affect the growth pattern of that plant, and getting a little ahead of things sometimes can do that, because unexpected things will happen as far as weather is concerned. Like you said, it's an average frost date number, so I mean we could still see
Yeah.
temperatures dip after that as well too. So it's always good just to be sure, especially with directly sowing seeds and all of that, is for the warmer weather crops.
Yeah. Are you using any season extending, any hoops and plastic or anything like that? Or do you just wait until everything's right and put the
For the
seeds and
most
the plants
for the
in the
most
ground?
part, yeah, it's I'm pretty seasonal. I do have these like really cool they were covers for a sunroof that my neighbor had, and they're just like perfectly shaped like plastic domes in a way, like you see on your 72 cell trays, and they fit just perfectly over top of my 2 foot by 4 foot elevated raised beds I have in the back. So
Okay.
I'll use those. So I'll have those two things that'll go on a couple of my beds back there, that I will extend out and utilize for, you know, like getting my lettuce and spinach and the cooler weather greens and things like that that I'll grow throughout the winter time. And in my area, it really works well. I don't have, I mean, they'll slow down from growth a little bit, but I don't have like that complete like freeze when it to stop anything. So those covers work perfect to keep things growing pretty much throughout the winter, especially my
Yeah.
spinach. My spinach just loves it.
Yeah. And the covers, they don't need to be anything special. Like you're saying, just a quick cover over an
Hmm.
area. The forecast has changed mildly today, but as of yesterday, I had a hard freeze forecast for the end of the week, and I just
Yeah.
put some bare root roses in the ground, and they're starting to bud out. And my plan was just to take a big black nursery pot and stick
Yeah.
over the areas as well, and it's just that 1 or 2 night cover that you need.
Yep.
I have hoops, and I like to get in advance on the season with covering with plastic. But yeah, I agree with you. That's kind of the way I tend to do it these days, is just cover as they need to be covered. Now, Bowtie Life in the Garden is saying, I've been listening to you talk soil temps for years. This year, for the first time, I'm finally using my soil temps with great success.
Mhm.
I'm so glad to hear that, because I really do think it's a big deal. I have a number of different thermometers I use, including a compost pile probe and a meat thermometer. What is it that you use to measure your soil temperature? Just so people understand, it doesn't need to be a big deal.
Yeah. Again, too, similar, like you said, I've got one of these, and it's a long thermometer, metal thermometer. I don't think it's a meat thermometer. I don't think it's got like, but but yeah, it's just a regular simple little dial thermometer, stick right in the ground, and and just get it down there deep enough, about a good 7 or 8 inches or so, just to make sure I'm getting right down in there to see where,
Mhm.
where it's going to be really cool, where the root base is going to be, and see what that temperature is looking like in there. And that's one of the things I find though too. Here's something when it comes to like soil temperatures, even like on some of those cooler nights when we have those really warm days, like during this time of year, like we had like 70 some degree day the other day. It was 75, so mid 70s, but it cools down into the mid 30s overnight.
Yeah.
So I'll go out. I went out there and checked the soil temperature, like after the next day, early in the morning, to see what it was. And it wasn't, it wasn't that cold. It's like when it warms up like that, the soil can hold a certain temperature through the
Mhm.
night, and it'll only dip so much. And again, too, that's why we're looking at, getting those overnights to a certain level. And then once you get to about that certain level, that soil temperature is going to start maintaining and really holding a good temperature. And
Absolutely.
yeah. So I mean, again, it's a really good idea to be keeping an eye on that, because that's one of the things I found that's really helped out my gardening and growing, is making sure I'm paying attention to that sort of stuff. Because in previous years past, like I mentioned before, I would just go out and start planting things, and I wouldn't get as much success, or they wouldn't be growing as well, because we would get those temperature dips. And and then and so in the last few years, having changed my tactics, and waiting for the temperature to warm up, I find that the plants just grow extremely better when I'm paying attention, and making sure that the soil temperatures are correct. It's again too, it comes down to soil. I mean, soil, like, whether we're taking care of our soil and making sure it's got, got the organic material and the life that it needs to really make our plants thrive. Even when it comes to planting plants, we soil temperature is huge. So it's really all about the soil when it comes to gardening.
It really is. One of the first things that I remember from my master gardener training 20 years ago is from the Colorado State University, and they'd done some research and what they taught was more than 80% of the plant problems we have are related to soil. That
Mhm.
includes pests and disease and
Yeah.
production and how well the plants grow. It almost all of it can be directly linked to the soil.
Mhm.
And like you point out, the temperature is one aspect of it, the nutrition, the life within the soil, all of that is so important. And most of us don't even learn it for the first 10 or 15 years that we're gardening. We just keep making the mistakes along the way.
Yeah, I
And so
know.
how do you amend your soil, or what do you do to how and when I should ask are you focusing on improving the soil in your garden?
Yeah, again, I try to keep things as natural and as simple as possible when it comes down to it. I've spent years playing around with, NPKs, and trying to do this or putting this amendment versus that amendment, trying to chase different ways of amending the soil. And really, when it comes down to it, what I've found is the best is to find the most natural way of doing that. And again, too, is I don't have like a hot composting system. What I have is just basically a standing compost, where I just pile in
Mhm.
yard debris and leaves and plant waste and things like that I just kind of pile up throughout the year. And then each year at this time, as everything starts to warm up, I go through and I'll sift out the compost, and I'll use that, and I get enough of it now to where I'm just spreading that around onto all of my containers, elevated raised beds, some of the in-ground beds, and I'm just kind of spreading that around. I used to and have used mainly like just a regular, just all-purpose dry organic fertilizers. What I've basically used is my soil amendments for the last couple of years. I've had a couple of different products and things that I've used, and was working with some companies, so I had some of that stuff available. I used for the last couple of years, but this year, other than just the the only thing I'm going to be feeding my plants this year is going to be worm teas made from worm
Oh,
castings that
okay.
I've started raising my own worms. So I'm making my own worm castings now. So trying to create this, I've got my own cycle, my own thing available for everything and all my inputs for my garden right here on our property. And the worms were a big one because for years, the last few years, I especially have been buying worm castings and
Yeah.
utilizing them, on the advice of other gardeners, and found that, they work really well. And so I decided finally, which I'm surprised after I've done it this year, that I didn't do it years ago, but started my
Yeah.
own worm bins and got my own worms going. And I'm actually just about ready to harvest my first worm castings from them and make some of my
Nice.
first worm teas. So I'm really excited about doing that. But that's going to be basically all I'm really going to do for as far as feeding and amending any of the soil in our gardens this year.
Nice. Nice. Yeah, I
Yeah,
was just
just
checking on my worms yesterday, feeding them, and realizing that I have half a bin of castings that I forgot I needed to harvest. So I'm in the same mode. So
yeah.
uh, Outlier Gardener is asking if a soil test includes a lot of info, but not the nitrogen reading. Should I avoid using that one? They said they don't include it because nitrogen is so volatile. And so uh, actually, I've been doing soil tests for a number of years now, and I think it's very important. The One of the things I've learned is that you often can't trust the nitrogen reading that you get with a soil test, because even the transporting of your soil through the mail or in your car to a laboratory or wherever it is, that can throw off the nitrogen reading when it's tested. So I wouldn't be too concerned, outlier gardeners. It's the other information that's important. Nitrogen will leach through the soil, and it's really the one thing that we need to replace. I replace it using organic materials that are broken down, and I've had soil tests done over a period of time, and the nitrogen reading is always different between
Mhm.
the tests. So I wouldn't avoid using a soil test just because it doesn't include the nitrogen reading. And instead, the company that I'm doing now, Soil RX. In fact, I got a link to home tests down below, and that's one of the ways I learned that is them saying that it's one of those things that you have to be really careful about. And so for years, I gardened without getting a soil test done. And then once I got a
Mhm.
soil test and realized how bad my soil was and how that explained a lot
Mhm.
of the things weren't growing like I hoped they would, I
Yeah.
became a believer. So, what are your thoughts on soil testing?
Um, I think it's great. I think it's something you should definitely do. I did a few tests years ago on my soil, because again, you want to know what you kind of want to know what you're dealing with right at first, especially, especially if you're just getting started gardening or just started gardening in a new space that hasn't had a garden before, maybe, a new backyard for you or something like that. So getting a soil test, I think, is really kind of a important thing to do in those sort of instances for sure, because you want to know what you're dealing with right off the bat. So that way you can start making some of those amendments and changes. And then eventually, I think that if over time, though, as we're learning more organic gardening practices and we're doing things, but again, compost, doing things, adding these sort of natural amendments to our soil, what we should be doing is building great soil biology over time, to where we hopefully don't need to test much anymore after that.
Yeah,
We're just, we've built something. But at first, I think it's really kind of important for people to understand what their soil is before you really get going in your gardening. So before you start spending a couple of seasons going, why isn't this growing very well? And then you can, it's just a good way to get yourself off to a good start.
absolutely, absolutely. And now Milltown Life is asking a question about worm farming. How big of a bin do you have to really make a difference and have enough tea and castings to use in your garden? So I actually, I had one bin and then I separated out the worms, made two bins, and now I'm back to one bin because I just don't give them as much attention. And it's just a tote, just
Yeah.
one of those travel totes.
Mhm.
And in a year, I make enough castings to add to all of my potting mixes, everything that I'm doing for my indoor plants. And so, to answer this question specifically, you actually, depending on how big your garden is, you need a lot of worms to provide castings for an entire garden. So, I use my worms for the indoor potting up and preparing of the plants in the beginning. And so, is that what you've got? Is just one of those basic totes that
Mhm.
you've got your worms in?
Yeah, just nice storage totes that you can get, real, real basic, real simple, easy, inexpensive. The one thing I will say is that, and I think they were mentioning there in that comment too, is the way that you really, and this is where I was like, this is where it kind of really hit me. I was like, I need to be doing this because, taking and making teas with your worm castings really expands how much you can, coverage you can have basically from your worm castings, and creating those teas, um, for fertilization. And because you only really need to get a nice little handful, maybe a little, not even a handful, for like a little 5 gallon aerated bucket, and then there you got a whole 5 gallons worth of fertilizer. So I find that's a, good way to really expand the use and get more out of your worm castings, is making the teas so you can get a bit more coverage. But yeah, I've got just the one bin right now, and like you said, I've got enough growth in it, and I think there's enough worm babies and all that in there that I'm thinking about starting maybe a second one up. But I'm not sure. Maybe we'll see what I get when I get the second one going and all of that. But I'm pretty sure that I should have enough to cover what I have for my garden spaces with those.
And so, you say you're ready to harvest. So how much of the castings are you going to harvest here as part of this first batch? A quart, 8 cups. I mean, how much of the castings are you actually planning to harvest?
Well, there's it seems to be quite a bit in there that I can tell. I mean, I was really surprised. I was feeding them for a while, and then was just um, noticing that they were eating just mostly the food and not much of the bedding. So I just kind of left them go for a while and just let them sit for a while. And they've just really eaten. I went in there, and it's just so fine and so nice right now. I've probably got at least a gallon or two
Okay,
of
that's a good amount.
worm castings that I'm gonna probably pull out of there, is what I would imagine I'm gonna get from this first batch. So that's a good couple of gallons worth, I'm sure, that I'll have.
Okay,
As far as
and it took
castings,
about 3 months, 4 months. How long did it take to get
yeah,
that?
what did I start them in? Late October, early November. It was right around the time I started my garlic when I built those up. So yeah, so they've been going now. November, December. Yeah. They've been going for a while now, for
Yeah,
several
I think
months. Several months.
generally, we can expect to get 2, hopefully 3 harvests of castings in a year. So ultimately, it comes
Mhm.
down to how big your garden is and how you're going to use the castings to really
Yeah.
determine how much they're going to be. I like this comment from Big Will Dog 82. I've got a uh, garbage can with leaf mold in it. I made leaf mold
Mhm.
a couple years ago. It's incredible stuff, and
Yes.
I like the idea of mixing it with castings to and I've got the leaf mold again primarily to use in potting mixes and in my container growing. Have
Mhm.
you done leaf mold before?
Yeah, I did every year, and in fact, I'm
Oh,
doing it even more too. I get tons of leaves that drop off of my front yard trees here, And a lot of those I've just spread around just as whole leaves over the years, just kind of over different beds and all of that. But over the last couple of years, I've actually been mulching them down and actually grabbing bags of leaves from my neighbors too as well, and we mulch them down, and I cover everything up with all of those leaves. Again, another great natural amendment,
Yeah.
and I'm adding them in. It's part of the worm casting bedding, or the worm bedding that I'm making for my worms and all of that. One thing I will say about the worm bins, though, just to get back on that for 1 second, is I didn't have very many worms when I started, so I think that's why it took them longer to start really eating up everything, and why it's taken
Mhm.
just a little bit longer for me to get my first batch here. But now I got a lot of population of worms now, so I'm sure that it's going to start getting a lot faster as far as being able to harvest and all of that. But yeah, leaf mold's great. I mean, it's one of those again, trying to keep those natural
Yeah.
amendments, that you're keeping things as I don't know, regenerative as you can around here. I'm using as many inputs that I can that are just coming to me naturally, and leaves are just one of those ones that rain from the trees, in the fall time, and are work so perfectly. And here's another thing, that I found that was really cool, and I get a lot of questions, and I'm sure you do, about this all the time. Are cats in the garden? And
Mhm.
I have an alleyway I grow in, and so I've got cats that are coming around all the time and messing with things all the time. And over the last couple of years, that I've really just put deep leaf mold bedding onto all of my garden beds, especially the ones I don't use during the winter time. Cats don't mess with that. They don't dig in leaf mold. They want dirt. They want to
Yeah.
scratch in dirt or sand, and they don't get in there. They don't like the leaf mold, so they don't touch any of my garden beds when I have, nice thick leaf bedding and all that. So there's another benefit to
There you
putting
go.
leaves on all of your stuff as well too. Keep some of those critters out.
Yeah. The use of leaves, I think, is overlooked by so many gardeners, and I use it as a mulch, like you're saying.
Hmm.
I'll dry the leaves and I'll crush them up. I usually mix them with grass clippings and straw because it's so windy here in Colorado that
Yeah.
by themselves they blow away. But when it's all combined as a mulch, it tends to hold together pretty well. But
Yep.
yeah, if you're not using leaves in your garden, you should reconsider your approach and start using leaves in the garden. The compost that we use in our soil amending tends to be bacterial based, and the leaves, when they're broken down by fungi. So by adding
Yeah.
leaves as a mulch, or even as a soil amendment, really benefits the growth of fungal networks within the soil, which are
Yeah.
really important. So yeah,
And then
absolutely.
that creates the perfect scenario. And again, the talking about worms, we're talking about leaves. That what you're doing when you're putting all them leaves out there all over everything is you're encouraging all them worms come up and eat, all that fungal and all that sort of stuff that these leaves are providing. So you're also getting worm castings and all of that. That's what the
Exactly.
beneficial thing is. You're getting aeration, and all the worms are doing all this sort of stuff as they're feeding on all of your leaves at the top of the soil there. And so they're just, you get so much out of doing that. And again, too, it just makes sense. It's coming back to nature again. I mean, it just makes sense that in the fall time, leaves die off and fall onto the ground to protect everything throughout the winter time, and create this environment for all of these little critters
Yeah,
and fungi and worms to do all of their business, and create just a even more livelier soil, when we're getting ready to plant the next season. So it just makes
absolutely.
sense. It makes sense to be using them. And if you can, you go around. Like I said, I get a ton of leaves, but I was like, what? I need more, because I need to cover everything. I need to do more of this sort of stuff. So I even go and grab bags from my neighbors' yards as well, too.
Yeah, Bowtie Life in the Garden is saying I have a neighbor that puts out 2 to 300 contractor bags of leaves
Oh,
every
wow.
winter. It's how I started a lot of my beds one year. I always try to get some with my trailer when time comes. Yeah, that if you've got a source like that, and because I'm the same way. It's like I'm always looking for more leaves because you can just never have enough.
Yeah, and what I found works really easy too is I take the bags and I dump them into a nice pile, and I take my lawnmower and I put it right over top of them and mulch those things up, and it works so quickly, so well, and then take those, dump them right back into a bag, and I've got several bags of mulched up leaf mold. So, and which is the best way to go too, mulch it up. Another thing I'd say though
Yeah,
too
and
is the thing
like
that I
Yankee
found.
Sista.
Yeah.
No, go ahead. I was just going to say Yankee Sista Homestead, and I love when I do this too, is uncovering the leaves and finding that there's so many worms underneath.
Right, they just
So
love it.
anyway, sorry
They
to
love.
interrupt. What were you
No,
saying?
no, no. I was just saying the one thing about, making sure you mulch up your leaves though too is with some leaves, especially bigger, broader leaves, you get a bunch of them together, then they just create a mat when they get wet, and
You're
then
right.
it can create a thick, thick mat, which then can be not so beneficial to certain things, in a way. Um, but so I mulch them up, and even like when I plant out my garlic beds. I used to would put like the whole ones on there. The garlic would have a hard time growing because it's trying to put up there, and the 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 leaf stem will start curling back because they're being
Yeah,
matted down by the leaves. But when I started mulching up the leaves, they grow right through it without a problem.
absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah.
And it's the concept, and of course, not everybody has to garden the way I garden or the way you garden,
Hmm.
and it's the approach we take. And I consider myself an organic gardener, and if I can source all of the things I add to my garden from my own backyard,
Yep.
I think that's really a great approach to take. And so one one caution I would send out to everybody is if you are collecting grass clippings or leaves or anything from a neighbor that's got it in a bag, take the time to walk over and ask the neighbor if they sprayed their trees, if they sprayed the grass, if
Hmm.
what's the the source of that bag, because I'm sure you've
Yeah.
heard the horror stories of gardeners that added something to their garden and it was contaminated with an herbicide and ended up damaging the plants that they were trying to grow.
Yeah. Yeah, that's definitely great advice because you never know what other people are doing. We all do different things when it comes to our spaces and our homes and all of that. And I go to the garden centers all the times, just to check things out. And in those big box stores, they've stocked them shelves with all of that just horrible poison chemicals. And you come back around a week later and see half the shelf gone. So,
Yeah,
there's people out there, your neighbors and everything who are spraying things like crazy out there. And so it's definitely a good idea to make sure and find out whether or not someone's spraying and doing that. That's just, yeah, something you definitely don't want happening.
yeah, gardens happen. Is asking, I tend to not see worms in my yard. Would worms from a local bait shop work to start a worm farm, or is there a better source to get them to start a worm bin? And so there are a number of different types of worms, and you
Hmm.
can check out my video where I talk about the different types of worms. The worms we use in our vermicomposting in the bins that Enoch and I are talking about are a completely different kind of worm than what you're going to find naturally occurring in your
Yeah.
garden, and they can't handle cold temperatures at all. If the temperature starts dropping below about 70 degrees 21 celsius, those worms slow down, and if it
Yep.
drops much below that, they can actually stop eating and die. So they will not survive my winter. They will not survive a southern Oregon winter. They
Yep.
won't survive most of our winters. One of the things I did to encourage the worms, so over most of my garden area, I have 3 to 6 inches of wood chip mulch. And when I
Hmm.
first started at this house almost 5 years ago now, I also had no worms in the soil, couldn't
Yeah.
find worms anywhere. But by just coating my soil with mulch, the worms showed up. And
Yep.
like you were saying earlier, with them coming up and eating the leaves, if you put something on top of the soil, that the worms will find it. And it's
Mhm.
just that's just kind of the way they work. A bait shop may be a way, depending on uh,
I mean, if
what
you're just
kind of
looking for your
worms.
yard, if you're looking for your
Exactly.
yard, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it should be a local bait shop, and it should be, the night crawlers that they harvested from their backyard. Then yeah,
Mhm.
you can introduce that into your garden, and eventually they'll populate the space. But uh, there's there's one of those things that I think there are enough videos on YouTube from people who live in very warm areas that say that they're putting their vermicomposting worms in the garden and that they're doing great, but not very many of us can actually get away with that.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, if you're buying your worms or ordering them and spending the money on good composting worms like red wigglers, which are the
Yeah,
primary variety that you would get, you definitely want to make sure that you're taking care of them as far as temperature and all of that. And the big thing too is you want them working. So, they'll work nonstop, 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. And
absolutely.
you keep the temperature right, by keeping them indoors, whether it's a off the house garage that stays warm enough throughout the winter time, or in your basement or in some sort of place like that you can keep them indoors, is always the best bet as far as um, raising worms and raising and I always try to find the word. What do we call it? Are we growing worm castings? Are we?
Harvesting, that's what I
Yeah,
look
is that
at.
yeah, I know. So we're if we're looking to harvest worm castings, from a bin or something like that, definitely want them to be indoors. But like you're saying, and the question being whether they're outdoors or not, you definitely get them outdoors through, like you said, bait shops or other places. But one of the things I just did, and I didn't have too many worms prevalent in the areas because, like I said, again, it's an alleyway. It's there's not much. There was a lot of clay soil at first and all that. I started up just our for the the standing compost that I have.
Mhm.
I off to the side of it, on another part of it, I just started setting up an area where I was just putting in food scraps like I would feed my bins in the house, right? And I would start getting tons and tons of worms, and I'd grab some of those worms by the handful every now and then and kind of move them around and
Yes.
place them around and do things like that as well too, because then you can get them to come in large amounts to a food source like that.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, because like we're saying is if you're giving them something to eat on, they'll show up. And if and it's and again too, there's tons of varieties of worms, and you definitely want your outdoor worms outdoors.
Absolutely. And they migrate. And I did like you, and I when I started seeing worms in some of those areas where I had compost in the ground and mulch on
Yeah.
top, I would do the same thing. I'd take some of those worms and add them to one of my raised beds, or I think I ended up doing two of my raised beds. And within a couple years, all of my raised beds had worms in them,
Hmm.
because they're going to migrate from one bed to another bed, between the beds and the pathways, as long as they've got food to eat in the soil. And our garden beds are filled with food for worms. If you're mulching and if you're composting, it really can make a big difference. Heidi Clark, our fantastic moderator, is asking if a person does not know if a leaf source, or if a leaf source is not sprayed, how long do they need to let it sit? And this is one of those things that it depends on what was used, but most of our household poisons, the herbicides, the pesticides, all those things that are being used, tend to have a half life less than 6 months to a year. And so, whenever I don't know the source, I let it sit for a year in the sun. The sun will bake off some of that stuff, it'll evaporate, and it'll eventually degrade to the point that it's no longer a problem. So Heidi, 6 months to a year is usually good enough. And I do want to give a shout out to Jay Dixon, who is not with us today. Our other moderator, she's
Yeah.
not going to be with us next week as well. And I'll let her share what she wants to share when she's back in a couple weeks. But I just
Yeah.
want Jay to know that I and all the rest of us, of course, are missing you. And I noticed a couple of the comments. Jay is a woman. This was a mistake I had made a couple of years ago when I was first corresponding
Me
with Jay.
too.
I
Me
think
too.
I think it's very common. Jay is so active with so many live streams from
Yep.
so many channels that she is sorely missed when she's not able to be
Yep.
a part of us. But
Yeah,
Heidi is with us today.
she's our moderator for the Let's Get Growing show on Saturday and Sundays as well too, and I definitely miss her when she's not around. Such a great presence in our live streams, and does such a wonderful job helping, throwing in all of these great links and all these sort of things, video links when we're talking about videos. Just so great, so awesome.
Yeah, she's so good
And
at that.
yeah, I got her email, and I did make the same mistake. I had to send her an email actually earlier this year saying, I am so sorry. I did not know. And that's the kind of thing about online and not being able to see people other than just their names. So we can make assumptions pretty easily. But yeah, I call her the YouTube's greatest moderator.
There you go. I would agree with that.
Yeah.
And so, as we look to the season ahead, as you're getting ready to put your plants and your seeds in, I'm doing something totally different this year. I'm only growing plants that I've never grown before, new varieties that were
Oh,
recommended to me by my viewers, and looking forward to it. And so,
that's a
what are
good
you
one.
doing different? I think it's important that we always do something different or something new in the garden. So share with us some of the new things or what you might be trying differently this year.
As far as things that are different, I think we really kind of covered the big main one here already is that, as far as amendments and all that, we're just going with worm castings as far as fertilization and doing that sort of stuff. So that's pretty much my big new experiment this year. I do like the idea of like just growing all new stuff in a sense too, because I love growing new things. But there are some mainstays. There's some things that I grow every year I think I would miss if I had that sort of situation. But there's going to, we've got a lot of actual things that are going to be expanding though this year, which is really great because I got a new owner for my property. And
Oh,
this new owner just loves the stuff that we do already, and is going to be letting me do some things that I've been wanting to do for a long time. Like we've got a couple of front yards. This is actually like a duplex house. So it's a house split in half. And so it's got kind of like two little front yard spaces right out front. And so both of us are going to actually put in garden beds in the front. So we're going to expand to front yard gardening right in my place too, which is going to be really kind of fun and exciting. I'm really looking forward to being able to do that. We were just out talking the other day about plans on getting that started. One of the things that I got started with when I started my channel years ago was growing. I had a pepper garden up on my carport rooftop. And it was kind of the one thing that kind of
really?
got everybody in the neighborhood and all the people really kind of paying attention to what I was doing and growing over here. And it was kind of like the main reason I started my YouTube channel, is to kind of show this rooftop gardening thing that I was doing. And eventually, over a couple of years, the previous owners found out I was doing that, and they didn't like it too much. So they had me cease and desist that whole project, and I had to take it all
Oh
down.
no.
I did a video on that. They actually, it was just really crazy. It was a management company, so you can imagine why it wasn't so personal. But they sent me an eviction notice. Either take those
Oh
down
no.
or you gotta move out. I was like, what? So we took those down, but now I get to bring them back. So that is another thing that's really exciting for me this year too. Is I got some new buckets that we're gonna make some of those 5-gallon Wiccan buckets, and we're gonna set
Nice.
that whole pepper garden and maybe some other things up there too. And I want to try to dabble in doing some bees. That's going to be my I think my next
Oh,
big project too, though, that I want to get into and learn about. Is I've just had a ton of
nice.
fascination about bees and raising them and all of that. So I think that's something I'm going to do. I'm going to try, actually, what I'm going to do though is I'm going to try to work with a local organization and have them help me out and getting that set up and everything, so that I can
Nice.
possibly promote what they're doing, and also kind of have a, make some videos and show some people how we get it started from a beginner angle on starting with bees. But that would be really fun.
Yeah.
That's one of the things that we're going to do this year.
I think most cities have a beekeepers association.
Mhm.
I've been wanting to do bees for years. I've actually gone to the Beekeepers Association here in Colorado Springs, and most years they have a training course, and I've
Yeah.
done it twice, anticipating that at some point I was going to do the bees. And then, of course, when I got to this house and the whole garden is being built from scratch, so I haven't had time to get to the bees yet.
Yeah.
But yes, that is one of those things. That's a next level part of
Yeah.
gardening, and
Yep.
I'm waiting till my pollinator garden is filled and I've got blossoms all year, not all year, all during the growing season. And then I think I'll revisit bees. So I look forward to seeing your journey, and
Yeah.
that should be a lot of fun.
Yeah, yeah, I really can't wait for some of those things, especially the bees. Well, hopefully we'll get to that this year. That's what I'm hoping. And again, it comes as part of, like, 'cause we're gonna put them up on the rooftop along with everything else that we got up
Nice.
there, and I think it's gonna be a great spot for them. And it'd just be fun, a fun new adventure to get to do in the space, but then also being able to bring just a little bit more to what we're able to do in our small space that we have here. Chickens is another one. I want to get some
Yeah.
chickens, and rabbits. I think rabbits before chickens, though. I'm really fascinated with the idea of being able to use rabbit manure. And again,
Yeah.
too,
That's good stuff.
creating our own amendments, though, too, as well.
Yeah, I had some neighbors a number of years back that actually showed rabbits, like at the fair when you go see the kids
Oh,
that have their rabbits, and they had a barn filled with rabbits of all different sizes and shapes
yeah,
and varieties, and that was before I was really uh, active in gardening, before I knew much about the rabbit manure. And I look back at it, it's like, I wish I would have known, because I mean they had truckloads of the rabbit manure that
yeah,
would have been available to amend my garden. So
yeah,
yeah, if you do rabbits, that can definitely be a great source. Lawrence is saying I have some mason bee boxes in both my front and backyards and see bees using them every year. I did a video about this a couple years ago. I have a bee hotel, same idea. And I was just out yesterday looking at it.
yeah.
And, not nearly as many bees as a hive, but it is fun to see the holes that are drilled into a
Right.
log. You can see the plug that the bee has sealed that hole with. And so I'm going to try to keep my eye on it and see if I can actually see the bees emerging this year. I've always missed it by
Yeah.
a day or two. I'll go out and take a look, and all the holes are open and the bees are gone. But bees of all types are just so much fun to do.
Yeah, I've missed a couple. I've only had a few. I think I need to relocate my little beehive thing that I've got for mason bees, because I haven't seen too many in the one that I put out a couple years ago. I've seen a couple that I know that they've used that I've missed, but not as many as I'd like to see. So I think I might have to relocate it or something.
Well, and so Brian's garden raises a good point. Most of the flowers I plant are directed toward attracting pollinators. Added bee balm and yarrow this year, and like to my point, I'm really trying to get the flowers growing before I bring in bees, because
Hmm.
very few of my neighbors even have a flower of any type in their yard. It's just so hot and dry here that most people don't even have a yard to speak of. And
Yeah.
so how are you managing that? Oregon, of course, has a lot more lush green growth than my part of Colorado. But are you planting flowers with the intent of attracting the beneficials?
Yeah, I try to, and this is something again, one of those great garden lessons that you learn over time. I just got into growing, growing food and fruits and vegetables and things, and just started expanding and growing all this sort of stuff all over the place, but didn't pay attention to flowers really that much. And once I started implementing and putting out flowers in my garden and spreading them out throughout our different spaces, whether they're in containers or I've got some in ground. And again, too, throughout the season, too, seasonal flowers are, can be really seasonal. So try to make sure I've got some sort of flowers that are blooming at any point in time throughout the season as well. But, that's the one thing I found though, is once I introduced flowers to my garden spaces, the production of my garden went up. It just,
Absolutely.
and it was noticeable. I mean, it was like, wow. I mean, I went from, I would get this much of, this many, peppers or this many, whatever it is you're growing throughout a regular year in those first few years I was gardening. But once I started really implementing all these different flowers throughout the garden spaces, it was noticeably different how much I was harvesting from my garden, from my plants and my spaces, and so it was just one of those great lessons to learn about how important that sort of stuff is in our gardens, not just for how awesome they make our gardens look, just having beautiful flowers all over the place is really great, but it's bringing that life
Yeah.
into our garden spaces is what it's really doing. And whether it's bees or other types of pollinators, or it's just all good to have throughout your garden spaces, and really, again, like I said, it was really noticeable.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'd seen it. I wish I would have actually tracked it better to be able to say it was 30% or 80% or
Right.
150%, but
Yeah.
it is noticeable. It is something that
Mhm.
you can definitely see. Dusty Flats is saying plant flowers with multi tiny blossoms is the best.
Oh, yeah.
And Boothby Garden says second year onion flowers, bugs love them. And so that's what I was talking about at the beginning of the show when I was
Yeah.
talking about the umbels, those plants that look like the flowers look like umbrellas on dill plants, and
Yeah.
like the question about the onion flowers. Those are the kind of things. Herbs, a lot of herb flowers are really really good for attracting beneficial insects. What is surprising, and I don't know if you've done any research or reading on this, but many of the cultivars, the pretty flowers that we pay big money for, many of those, because they've been modified so much to get the pretty color or to get the big shape or to get the double blossom flowers basically attract no pollinators. All
Yeah.
of those specialized cultivars, they're
Mhm.
pretty and there's nothing wrong with having them in the garden, but those aren't the ones that are attracting the good insects. It's just the average plant that we've got
Yeah.
growing in the garden. Borage has a wonderful flower
Mhm.
that attracts the insects. Salvia is one of my favorite for
Yeah.
attracting bees.
Those are just, yeah, those will really get the bees going crazy. Um, yeah, and again, too, one of the other things too is get a hold of your local extensions or local nurseries and find out about native flowers for your area too. So you're really working to attract those
Absolutely.
native pollinators and really get them going. But the point they were making about the small little flowers, it's those that I always notice the most action. When you got plants, they got those little flowers. Oh, one that really get oregano. I let my oregano. I have this oregano in the back, and I let it go to flower every year just so I can watch the bees dance all over it.
Yeah.
It's literally the main reason why I let it go to flowers, just so I can spend those few couple of weeks as the bees are just going nuts over it. It's just so fun to watch them just go crazy.
Yeah, I just cleaned up my oregano a couple days ago, as a matter of fact, because I let it go to flower and then let the dried flowers sit over the course of the winter, just in case there's anything that needs an extra little seed to eat.
Yeah.
And so my oregano is already growing great, and I've got it all cleaned up. But I do the
Mhm.
same thing. I'll harvest it, dry it to use in the kitchen, and then I just let it go because
Yep.
most herbs like that. If you just let them go, they're going to flower, and the insects absolutely love them of all
Yeah,
type.
yeah. We're talking about flowers. I want to. I don't know if you can see this or not. Well, you probably can't. You'd have to go
Let
full.
me.
You'd have to go full screen here, real quick.
There you go.
Right here is, and you can barely see it, is this flower that I just love right now. You can bring it back now, but it's a Dracania uh, fragrans, basically known as a corn plant. And this isn't like
Oh yeah,
corn, not corn
yeah.
that we grow out in our gardens at all, but this is a corn plant. It's kind of got the woody stalks that you see, and you find these in most garden centers. And they got the plants that kind of grow out the sides, and they got the nice long leaves like a corn, like corn, or corn does out in the garden. But one of the coolest things about having these sort of plants is if you're lucky enough to get them to flower.
Yeah,
And it's one of the most amazing fragrances, and that's why they call it Dracania fragrans, is because it literally is one of the most amazing flower smells that you can get and it just fills the house up. Like, you just get bombarded
nice.
with this smell when you walk in the door. And again, too, I've had two of these plants over the years, but this is the third time that I've actually had a flower come off of them, and it's just really one of the coolest ones you can get. So I always encourage people to get one of these corn plants, and
Nice.
if you're lucky, somewhere down the line, you might get one of them to flower for you, and it's just one of the coolest experiences. Not only that you get to have, though, but your neighbors get that experience as well too. Because when you open the door, it's
Oh, it
the
just
smell
smells
is so just
the aroma.
floats out into the neighborhood.
Nice. Big Will Dog is saying, I find it funny how my neighbors pay big money to weed control companies, but seem puzzled why bees are always in my yard. Makes for interesting mowing, though. Yeah, as I was walking through my garden this year, I've got dandelions popping up everywhere, and I love it. I
Yeah,
don't spray my dandelions. They're breaking
yeah,
apart my hard soil. They're among the first food sources for bees in the
yep,
garden. And yeah, I also find it funny that so many people are paying to get rid of plants that are actually good plants to help the
yeah,
environment out.
yeah. Not only that, very nutritional, those dandelions too.
Like, and,
One of Yeah, one of our most recent guests we had on our Sunday show, what was our first book club. We're doing a book club on our Sunday edition of our show, and it's where we feature just a book and an author each month. And last month, our first book month was with Ellen Zakos. She wrote. Let me see if I got this here. She wrote this book, "How to Forage for Wild Foods Without Dying."
that's
And
good.
it's a good field guide for 40 edible wild plants. And of course, dandelions are one of those. But it's amazing all the really great things that are growing out there that we don't really even understand or think about, because, in our minds, mostly they're weeds or things that most people just want to get rid of. And again, one of the
Yeah,
main reasons why those super big box store shelves are so full of those chemicals that people use to go out and spray all of these just really wonderful things that are growing out there, that if we just let them grow and let things do what it needs to do naturally, our I think everything looks better, and just, it's just more natural, and there's
yeah.
nothing better
Well,
than
and
that.
you were talking a few minutes ago about the flowers in the garden producing a noticeable effect on the
Hmm.
improvement of the garden. And so at the Galileo School Garden, I I let a lot of native plants grow to include the weeds, and then of course I brought in lots of uh, plants, flowers, grasses, herbs to attract the beneficials. But one of the things that I found most interesting and such a good memory is when the students would come out to the garden, I would point out a weed, or what was commonly thought of as a weed, and then
Hmm.
teach them about it. And dandelions in particular, every part of the plant is edible.
Yeah.
and I'd have a group of students around, and I would reach down, pluck off a flower or a leaf of the dandelion and eat it and say, you can eat this plant. And the kids
Yeah.
invariably would say, oh, can I try it? And before long, I'd have a group of students just walking through the garden, eating dandelion flowers and eating dandelion leaves. And it changed their whole perspective about the difference between a weed and a useful plant in the garden.
Yeah, yeah, and it's so amazing again too, for kids to be able to learn that early on. That was something I didn't have. I remember, uh, my first or it was our second anniversary, me and my wife's second anniversary, we went on this dinner train with this five-star chef and all of this sort of
Nice.
thing. It was just, it was just for our anniversary dinner. And I remember the salad comes out the first course, and here comes this salad comes out, and it's got two dandelion flowers in it. And both of us, we never grew up with anybody telling us about dandelions or edible or anything like that. We both looked up at each other like, what is this? We went and spent all of this money to go on this great trip, and they got something from our front yard in our salad. We had no clue. It wasn't until years later when I got into gardening and growing and learning about things that I learned about the, dandelions. Well, I mean, I learned then that they were edible, but I
Sure.
learned more
Yeah.
about what the benefits are and the nutritional value of all of that was and everything. But, for a first experience like that to be, what is this? But yeah,
Yeah.
no, again too, there's so many things out there like that, like dandelions that we just don't realize. One of the other ones in the book that I learned about, one of my favorite things is garlic. I love garlic. I love growing garlic. It's one of the easy things to do. But I learned about wild garlic and how plentiful it is around in places, and so that's one of my tasks over the next few weeks is to find some wild garlic growing around my area somewhere.
Nice.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's sadly, at least in my part of Colorado, we don't have a lot of those spots. A lot of those wild plants grow along streams
Mhm.
or in shaded areas, and Oregon certainly has a lot of that. And Eastern Colorado, not so much. So
Yeah.
I've always wanted to be able to do stuff like that, and
Right.
and just have never lived in an area that enabled it. So you'll have to let
Yeah.
us know how that goes if you
Yeah,
if
you
you're
gotta go on some
successful.
special foraging vacations then, right? Go some
That's right.
places where you'll get some good stuff.
Yeah. And so, for those of you that might just be joining us or joining us late, Enoch Graham from the Urban Gardener channel is the guest today, and I started talking about the the Saturday and Sunday shows that you do, the live streams
Yeah.
with all the wonderful guests that you have,
So
and
many awesome
learning
guests.
so many lessons from so many guests. And I am lucky enough to be a regular guest. We're
Yeah.
doing a series I've already been on a couple times, the second Sunday of each month, and we've already programmed out at least about 2 or 3 or 4 more months. I forget
Yeah,
what we
yeah.
have about, but
Basically
I'll be on
indefinitely,
every
but
month.
I think we planned ahead, I think about 5, 6 months, right?
Yeah. And
But
so
yeah.
what we do, and so I'll give my 2 cents, and then I'd like you to talk a little bit more about how the show is set up, because when I do a live stream with a guest, I do the entire show with the same guest. We have a
Mhm.
chat, we talk all the things we talk about like we did with you. But
Yeah.
you break it up. You have segments that you cover different topics with different guests, some of them regular, and like me, when it comes time, uh, you've already done half an hour of other
Mhm.
information, and then I
Right.
come on for 45 minutes or an hour or whatever it happens to be on the second
Yeah.
Sunday of each month. So why don't you share with all of us what those segments are and how you have your show set up?
Yeah, that was one of the things when I was first thinking of the show is I wanted to do something that was just a little bit different. I wanted to kind of, with the capabilities of what we're able to do with the StreamYard program that actually you use as well too,
Mhm.
just allows us to do some pretty cool stuff, and so my imagination kind of went wild with stuff when I was first discovering this. And so I wanted to be wanted to do something just a little bit different and offer a little bit more variety is basically what it came down to. So, at first, when we first started the show last year, we had two front segments of two short interviews. They were basically like an Instagram. So I'd have a Instagram gardener that I would invite on, or and then the next segment would be a channel of the week. So then when we would do a small gardening channel and give about a 15-minute or so conversation with each of them. And then this year we kind of brought those segments together to what we call the Are You Following Me segment. So it's either an Instagrammer or a small gardening channel. And that's just a great way to kind of just you know introduce people or give some people who don't normally get out as far as interviews or being able to
Mhm.
talk about gardening, especially like Instagrammers and that sort of thing. So be able to introduce people and give them a little bit of a platform to be able to talk and do that sort of thing and introduce themselves to everybody else, and then ending the show with a little bit more longer format conversation, more podcast style conversation that most folks are doing, like yourself as well. And then also mix in a few other little things. We've got some garden trivia. We've got Sarah from Sarah Seed Shop, and she does a little garden trivia for us in there. We're throwing in some little like terminology. So we have like a
Mhm.
little garden glossary thing that we do, kind of showing some fun gardening terminology and things, just kind of putting in little tidbits here and there of some stuff that I think is informational and kind of makes the show a little bit more fun. On the Sunday show, we do the front segment for the Sunday show is a segment we call In the Garden, and it's mostly done by my good friend Mark Boucher Colbert. He's a garden educator, and he teaches gardening to several different grade groups out of a Montessori school up in Portland, Oregon. He also cares for a rooftop garden that on this 4-story building in downtown Portland that he grows a bunch of food for the
That's pretty
rest
cool.
the restaurant right below. And so he's just so full of garden knowledge like yourself and all of that. So and a good friend. So we do that little in the garden segment. And sometimes I'll jump in and do one or something depending on what it is. And then for Sundays, we just kind of do it a little bit different from week to week. So like you're mentioning, the second Sunday of the week, we'll have you on to answer everybody's garden questions and do that sort of thing. And then the third Sunday of the month is our book club, like I was mentioning
Mhm.
with the last month's book was this How to Forage for Wild Foods. And next month's book, I'll just mention this though too real quick. I love this guy. Simplify Vegetable
Yeah,
Gardening,
Tony.
Tony O'Neill. Tony O'Neill's our book of the month for next month. So he'll be joining us next third Sunday of the month. And then the other Sundays, I'm doing something that doing what more of like a gardening roundtable type of thing where I'm inviting 2 or more guests on with me. So like, 3 or 4 of us getting together talking about different things that we got growing on in the garden. So just a bunch of different things to kind of give a little bit of variety from show to show and offer just a little bit more information, and I like to say fun in the show as well too.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And so I've got a link to your channel in the description below for anyone that isn't familiar with you. I had just
Yeah.
posted a couple comments of some people who are watching and have
Yeah.
found your channel and your
See a
streams because
see a bunch
uh,
of familiar names out there right now.
yeah, absolutely. And it's one of those things that I think it's important to highlight the rest of us. I've never considered YouTube to be a competition
Yeah.
where if I make a video and you make a video and you get a view on your video that's taking away a view from my video.
Right. Yeah.
It doesn't work that way at all. So I think you're doing such a great job promoting the smaller channels and especially the Instagram. I just got started on Instagram a couple months ago for the first time, and I'm
Yeah,
actually
I've been
loving it.
noticing that. I've been noticing that. Yeah. I actually really like it. I utilize Instagram more for, and I know I'm just not good at doing the reels. Just, I don't
Mhm.
know. It's something I have the hardest time with doing, but I love sharing pictures. So Instagram's a great place for like doing little picture montages and stuff. So you want to, so that's where I tell people to go. If you want to see what's really in my garden at most times,
Yeah.
definitely go to my Instagram because I'm snapping pictures and photos of things all the time there. And I really like that. Um, but again, too, what you're saying about the idea of YouTube channels and this idea of competition, and believe me, I've invited some people on the show who I've found are very competitive when it comes to that idea of things like you're talking
Really.
about, and it's just, to me, I find that to be kind of a bummer. When it comes down to it, I think one of the greatest things about gardening and especially YouTube, because that was one of the first places I found myself when I was first learning how to garden, was on YouTube, finding channels like your channel and other channels that help teach me and show me a lot of things about growing and gardening. And besides the things that we learn and get from each other, I find the gardening community just to be just one of the really great best communities that there are as far as
Oh,
any
yeah.
sort of niche that's out there in social media. And I like the idea of utilizing my platform and my space that I've created on YouTube and social media to highlight the community aspect of gardening. And there are so many wonderful people out there, and it was really one of the cool things. Like I said, it comes back to when I was first starting doing YouTube, and I was actually going and visiting people, and I was going places. It was just amazing to me how welcoming people were and how awesome they were to just spend some time with this guy in a video camera who wants to, go around and film their, not just film their gardens, but ask them to do little interviews and all that sort of stuff. And
Yeah.
I just found that to be so fun. And it was really great to be able to expand that through this show, through the channel, and doing this sort of thing, and getting to talk to all of these sort of people and highlight just the awesome people that are out there. There's so many great people putting out such great content,
Oh, yeah.
you know. And we, like you said, we've been really lucky to get some of the really great names out there too. um, you know I'm looking at a list of like all of the guests we've had, and I just, as I look at it and I look at the names, I can't even believe it. I
Oh,
really,
yeah.
when I got into gardening and YouTube and watching a lot of these people, I'd never imagined in the long run that I'd have a show and they would come on and talk to me about gardening and growing. And so it's been one of the great awesome things about doing the Let's Get Growing show is making those connections and getting to not just meet and talk to some of these really great gardeners, but again, kind of what we were talking about early on too, is to talk about these garden stories, each of
Yeah.
our garden stories out there. I think it's just so fascinating, each of us as individuals, what our stories are. And I think that's the cool thing about our show, is that that's what we really get to dig into.
And so share a little bit about your story, how you got involved with gardening, not so much the YouTube aspect of it, but
Yeah.
I always look behind you whenever you're on my show or I'm on your show, and the house plants you have, the green you have in your house, I have nothing like that. I'm an outside gardener. I don't really do
Yeah.
indoor gardening. But what's your story? What got you so interested in being
Yeah.
a gardener?
Well, there are a couple of aspects. I really love growing my own food. This is where my passion really just exploded. And that didn't happen until I was, 13, 14 years ago, so I was well into my adulthood before that happened. But my growing story really starts right up above my head here. There it is right there. This spider plant.
Okay, I do have one of those. I think most
Yeah.
people do.
Yeah, yeah, very common. But the cool thing is I gotta move my head. Let's see this direction here. There we go. The cool thing is all these little spiderlets that come down off of it, right? So I was about 7 years old or so, maybe 6 or 7 years old, and my mother's living room looked like this. This is what I grew up with.
Okay.
And so I was really fascinated just watching her. And as a little kid, always kind of getting in the way or trying to get involved with whatever she was doing. And so she was, propagating plants, at one time, and uh, showed me how to propagate a little spiderlet, and put it in water and grow the roots and pot it up when the roots grew. And I grew that spider plant right next to my bed on a nightstand for several years after that, and expanded and grew even more house plants. So house plants were something I kind of carried with me from being young to being an adult. And it's because of the house plants that my garden uh, food growing adventure started, because I had a friend
Okay.
about 14 years ago came to my place, and I don't know where he got it or why or how he ended up with this little cucumber start. He had this little cucumber start, and he's like, I don't know what to do with this. And he's like, you have all of these plants, so I figured you're the person that I need to give this to, right? And I was like, yeah, well, I don't grow vegetables or that sort of thing. I don't grow food. I've never done that before. But I took the little plant start and went and got some soil and put it into a pot and stuck it out on this balcony. I was living in an apartment, so all I had was my outdoor space was just a balcony. So I had this cucumber plant I put out on the balcony, set it out there, and made sure it was watered and cared for and everything. And that plant went on to, throughout the summer, take over my whole
Nice.
balcony. Just grew all throughout everything, and started growing some little cucumber fruits, and I plucked a couple of those fruits off when they looked ready to go. And here's how cool that is that cucumbers just happen to be like my daughter's favorite thing. We always
Nice.
had cucumbers. It was just her favorite thing. Just so happens to be this cucumber plant is the first one I get to grow as far as food. But I plucked these off, I cut them up, and we're eating these cucumbers. And I looked over at my daughter, and I think she was probably about 14 or so at the time or whatever. And I was like, I grew these, right? And she looks at me and she's like, what? No way, Dad. You didn't grow these. I was like, yeah, that plant that's growing out on the balcony right
That's
now
great.
is a cucumber plant. I grew these. And she couldn't believe it. And even at that moment, it was like, I couldn't believe that either. It was this just big old, was like, wow, you can grow your own food. I never thought about that,
Absolutely.
and even in this small space. And that's where really my garden and growing story, as far as growing food and the thing that I really focus on today, starts. And it was just really fortuitous that like I said, it was a friend bringing me a cucumber plant because I grew indoor plants, and just happened to be a cucumber, my daughter's favorite thing. And then from there, the story ends up, just explodes from there, everything else. I was lucky enough to move here to Southern Oregon, though, just shortly after that, and went from the balcony space to just a little bit more space with my
Nice.
back cemented patio. So so I was still working in a small space situation. And it was great, though. I mean, I loved that aspect of how I got to learn how to garden in that sort of fashion. Small space
That's
gardening
fantastic.
and learning that you can grow things, and more than you think you can grow in limited spaces.
That's fantastic. And so that's where the urban gardener moniker came from, because
Hmm.
you've always been in that spot where you're
Yeah.
in a city and you've got to figure out how to do it.
Yeah, I'm literally just a couple blocks from my downtown, here in the area. So we're really urban. And I remember I got advice though too from a bigger channel when I first started my channel. It's like, you should probably change your name. The Urban Gardener's too easy or too simple or something like that. I can't remember how they explained it. You'd probably be better off with a different name. And in the long run, I'm kind of glad I kept it.
Good. Yeah.
Yeah,
It's memorable. I find it easy to remember. Well,
yeah,
so it's been so nice having you on the show today, Enoch. And
you bet.
as we end up, I'll remind everyone that there's a link in the description below, and they can check out the live streams that Enoch's been doing for months now. And you might be surprised. You mentioned you were surprised at some of the guests that come on. And I think the average YouTube viewer will see the guests that you've had, and they'll be surprised too
Yeah.
that these are, I won't necessarily use the term famous,
Right.
but these are YouTubers that more than likely they've watched videos of, and you're just sitting down with them
Mhm.
for a chat. And I
Yeah.
look
Yes.
forward to seeing you here in a couple weeks for our chat that we have as well.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. And again, like I said, when I first started this show, in fact, you were my second guest. I had a really good friend on that I've done a lot of stuff with for my first one, but I was like, oh, if I could get Gardner Scott to be on my show, that would be so awesome. And that was one of those first, asks that I did, was reaching out to you to have you on the show, because you'd been on with me for something I did the year previous, and helped me out
Mhm.
with a tomato video I was doing. And so I was like, oh, let's get Gardner Scott. We're off and running. And just really appreciate all of your support and everything that you've done and been willing to share with us, and take part in this, especially, like I said, coming on once a month for us to be a part of what we're doing is just really, really amazing. And I just really appreciate you having me on your show, and helping me get the word out there about our show and all of that sort of stuff. Just really, really awesome. Thank you.
Oh, it's been my pleasure. And it's always a pleasure to sit down and chat with you. And so let's go ahead and
Yeah.
end here. Our time is up. Thank you
Yeah.
so much. Everybody, check out the Urban Gardener channel
Yes,
and the
definitely.
Saturday and Sunday live casts that you can be part of. So thanks so
Mhm.
much, Enoch.
Yeah, yeah. Saturday and Sunday mornings, 11 a.m. Pacific time, right here on the Urban Gardener channel on YouTube. And again, thank
Okay.
you so much, Gardener Scott.
Okay. My pleasure. We'll talk to you soon. So, always nice, of course, to promote the other channels. I think that's important for all of us. And I do hope you check out the channel, because there really is a lot of good information on a recurring basis every week. So, look for that if you would. I am back, as I started the show saying, after being gone last week. Next week, I'm not going anywhere. I'm going to be back here as well, and the week after that. So we're starting to get into the active growing season for almost all of us. And I hope you'll join me on our regular Mondays so I can answer your questions, I can share the information, and most importantly, we can just get together with this fantastic community and share our conversation back and forth. I hope you have a great gardening week. I hope the weather is cooperating with you as you put your plants in or get ready to put your plants in. And I'll see you back here next Monday. Same time, same channel. Of course, above all, enjoy gardening.